Hey guys, what's up? It's FalseBulls123 and welcome back to my channel. Now, near the end of the year, I notice a lot of booktube channels, what they like to do is they rate the best books they've read all year and the worst books they've read all year. And I wanted to, do something in the same vein. Now, I was thinking about it, and I'm thinking, I read some pretty awful books. I could spend the next 20 to 30 minutes just roasting them, ripping them to shreds, being, wow, this is trash, don't read it. But I didn't feel that was constructive. And I try to be a positive person. I try not to be overtly negative. And so I like rant reviews, I like doing rant reviews, I like watching rant reviews, and I just like taking the piss out of something truly awful, but I want to be more positive in my channel. I want to do things that kind of give you something that's a bit nicer than just plain old negativity. So what I thought would be kind of fun would be a sort of hybrid of the worst books I read all year video. And if you hated this, you might like this. Which, maybe that makes sense, but basically I'm just going to give you recommendations based off of books that I didn't like. Now, I didn't like them for a variety of reasons, and I know I say hate in my title, that's just a bit hyperbolic for the clicks, you understand how that is. But I chose these books for a variety of reasons. Either they were 1 or 2 stars for various reasons, they had excessive problematic elements, even if I didn't rate them below a 3, or I DNF'd them because I just could not really get through them. So, basically these are just books that just did not sit well with me, that pissed me off, or just did something that I really did not like. And so, I'm going to talk a little bit about the reasons why I chose these books, but a lot of the actual long sort of details and reviews have already been covered in all of my other booktube videos. I have a playlist on my channel, you can just kind of hunt and peck for those, I guess. I'll have to definitely try to work on interconnectivity in the future, so there's that. Another, part of this preamble is that some of the recommendations I'm giving you are not going to be books. I'm new to booktube, I've only been reading books, I guess, critically for about 6 or 7 months now, so the amount of books that I have a sort of critical thought of, that I've been thinking in that frame of mind, is relatively low. And unfortunately, I don't have the best memory of a lot of the books I read when I was younger, as a teenager, and as a child, so a lot of the media I'm going to choose now is things that I was familiar with. They're still stories, they're still narrative works, they're just not necessarily books. Some of these are going to be podcasts, or movies, or TV shows that have similar themes, along with, when I can think of one, a book, Also, some of these books were a bit more niche, a bit more out of the genres that I read, and so I'm not as familiar with some of the tropes used. And so while I tried my best to find, a good parallel between them, some of them were not as easy to come by. But I'll try to explain my reasoning on why I picked it, so your mileage will vary with these recommendations. All that being said, thanks for, listening to all those disclaimers. I know, it's booktube, disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. That all over, let's actually get into it. What are the books I hated?
Hey. Thanks. I hate it. So, everyone that I love is...
So, first up is the first book that I read this year, and that is The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware. Now, let's get into why I didn't like it. I DNF'd this book, that was the reason why it's on this list, and I believe I read 4 or 5 chapters in. And my main issue with it was just a really long preamble before we get to the meat of the story. Generally, I don't mind, people setting up the story, discussing their home lives or their character relationships at the beginning of a movie, because that adds character, it builds relationships, and it gives you a good sense of who the person is as the protagonist. Unfortunately, especially when you're dealing with a thriller or a mystery that is a location-based mystery, for instance, being on a cruise ship with a dead body, spending the first 5 chapters discussing things that do not seem to be relevant towards the projected plot, which is not something that really interested me. I also just didn't really get a good, impression of the main character, and a lot of the plot points and her reactions were confusing, and so it was really hard for me to truly enjoy the book. Now, I don't think that's a problem with the author. I read another book of hers after this, and I loved it. I thought it was great, and I really could appreciate her craft. Unfortunately, Woman in Cabin 10 did not do this for me, so there's that. What do I recommend for this, right? So the main idea of the book was that there was this man overboard, but no one really knows if he was actually there, and so it's like this unreliable narration style investigation, which loved the premise. Interestingly enough, this reminded me of an episode of Perry Mason, which if you don't know what that is, because you, I guess, didn't watch television with your grandmother, it was a procedural crime drama from the 60s and 70s, starring Raymond Burr, based off of a series of novels about a defense attorney named Perry Mason. So the episode I was remembering was called The Case of the Substituted Face. It was the season 1, episode 32. And it essentially follows a similar plot where Perry Mason goes onto a cruise ship and this woman's husband goes overboard and they're trying to solve the murder, or the supposed murder. And so I thought it was really interesting. I love the sort of cruise ship location, and I thought about those situations a lot. I really liked that episode. So if you're obsessed with Perry Mason, that would be a great film to watch to kind of get those vibes. Another book I chose was it was a mystery, not a thriller, and that's definitely one of the genres that I'm trying to help distinguish in my mind, is that I've read a lot of mystery novels. I grew up reading mystery novels, your standards, kind of pulp fiction, murder mysteries with some random, chick, and she makes cookies and solves murders or something. Grandma books. But I'm not as familiar with thrillers, and that's something that I really want to verse myself better with in the coming years. Anyway, so this is a mystery. It's a classic mystery. It's an Agatha Christie novel, in fact, and that is Death on the Nile. I love Death on the Nile. It's the first Agatha Christie novel I ever read, and it's also the first Hercule Poirot novel I ever read. And so essentially Hercule Poirot goes onto a cruise ship that's going down the Nile, and he has to solve a murder that occurs on board in front of him. But the person that was the most likely suspect has an alibi the entire time. And so you get on a cruise ship, you really get to see why location mysteries work so well. Basically, it's a bottle episode. You have a set group of characters, no one could get on the boat, nobody could get off the boat, and so one of them has to be the killer. And that can be really, really exciting, because you have this air of mystery that anyone can be the suspect. You also have a bit of, the spectacle of the location. If it's on a boat or if it's on something like that, you get sort of this interesting locale and setting for local flavor. And you also get a wide variety of people who might be traveling. And so all of these really work out, and that's what makes location mysteries so fun and so intriguing. And so that's kind of one of the ones I wanted to recommend, because it was also on a cruise ship, on a boat, and it also has a sort of mystery thriller aspect to it. It's a bit older, and it's not technically a thriller, but that would be my book recommendation. Next up was a book I had really high hopes for, but I ended up really disliking by the end of it. And that was One of Us is Flying by Karin McManus. So, basic plot, you have 4 teenagers, they're all in this locked room, and this fifth person, who's kind of this blackmailing antagonist figure in this school, dies suddenly. And so they're all murder suspects, but they all say that none of them did it. And so it's really about them forming this sort of coalition of people that are all pariahs in the school, as the secrets are exposed, and they try to solve the mystery of who actually killed this jackass. And you're like, okay, I can get down with it. It's a thriller aspect. It definitely has some Pretty Little Liar feels. And you're kind of just expecting this kind of melodramatic teen thriller. And, it definitely delivers in that aspect. There are teens. There is elements that are thrilling. There are people with, secrets and problems in their life. But I also have several issues with it. And I'm not going to get too deep into it because I roasted it pretty hard in my review of it. Essentially, it has several problems. First, the characters are very tropey. They're very classical jock, nerd, outcast. And yeah, we get it, a lot of Breakfast Club inspiration. But the whole point of that movie, which I have not seen, so, sue me and roast me in the comments, is that they're all supposed to be more complex than the stereotypes that they have. They are more developed than society's expectation of them. And while McManus does have some ability to flesh out her characters, it's all done in a very on-the-nose way, and it's not that innovative to really deepen the characters. Also, really lackluster LGBT representation. They have one gay character, and they don't really do anything with the character. And the homophobia and, problems he has in the story are essentially very mild, to a point where you really wonder if they were going to use issues like this, if they were going to have outing being a plot point in the book, why they played it so lightly, and also why she played any of these issues the characters faced so lightly. Honestly, I felt that Pretty Little Liars, which was another inspiration for this series, did its... And I only watched the show, I never read the books, but I think that Pretty Little Liars used that sort of conceit of kind of teenagers with a lot of issues and secrets, dealing with those issues and secrets with, like, you know, a antagonist trying to reveal that, so much better. And I hated Pretty Little Liars. I hated the main characters, and I just did not like any of them, but I think they handled the impact of that antagonist, like, you know, affecting the plot in a much more nuanced and interesting way. And so, essentially, that was one of the biggest issues I had. Also, they straight up demonized mental health and somehow managed to minimize both suicide and depression and school shootings at the same time. And I'm like, how do you do that? And also, what do you know the fuck you're talking about, McManus? Because it does not seem like you do. There were so many instances where I wonder, I don't feel like this woman actually knows what a teenager is, or how their life is, or the society that they grow up in, because it just comes off as very uneducated in the way that she portrays teenage culture and our society at large. And so, obviously, I had problems with the book. I think it was well written, but it definitely had a lot of issues, both with the tropes and the execution of said tropes. So, this was a hard one for me to pick, because I don't read a lot of, I guess, modern young adult novels, if that makes sense. Most of the young adult novels I read are genre fiction, or they just don't really have that kind of melodramatic coming-of-age style things. Obviously, YA thrillers aren't a big genre, and I really haven't read a lot of those books that do kind of fit into that category, just because I don't like melodramatic teen dramas. It's just not a thing of mine. That being said, I was racking my brain, and this, I feel, is more kind of on the Pretty Little Liars inspiration I picked it, but that's neither here nor there. And that is Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants by Anne Brashares. Now, it's not a thriller, it is, I'd really just call it a coming-of-age novel. But things that are similar is you all have 4 separate characters, so you have the multiple perspectives that was in one of us is lying, and they all are dealing with their own sort of issues. One is dealing with being left alone without all of her friends, and also it has some sick-lit, like, you know, subplots. Another person is dealing with an age gap relationship. Another person is dealing with her dad remarrying. And so there's a lot of emotion and drama going on throughout the entire book. But it's also about friendship and love and maturity and a lot of different elements. And it's so well written. I wasn't expecting to like Sister of the Traveling Pants because it presented very much as this chick lit, which I feel sounds sexist, but I feel like, you know, there is something to be said that there are definitely reasons why genres are divided by gender. There are different things that women enjoy that men don't, and things that men enjoy that women don't. I always liked the Hardy Boys, but I was never that interested in Nancy Drew, and so on and so forth. But Sister of the Traveling Pants is just a really well-written young adult novel, and I figure this is about the best fit I can give you with my limited palette. So next up is probably the worst book I read this year, which is sad because it's one of the only books I read that was published this year. And that was Have You Seen Me by Kate White. So, Have You Seen Me is a amnesia thriller, which, okay, cool premise. I like amnesia tropes, I like the idea of it as a thriller, and you can definitely get a lot of really interesting, like, you know, stories out because of the idea of the narrator as an unreliable one, since she literally does not know what happened. They did not execute this well, as you can imagine. A lot of the story was pointless, needless drama. None of the subplots interconnected with each other, which really just makes, like, the point of, if you were making this thriller where they're piecing together what happened that night, why wouldn't you interconnect anything? And you get 2 antagonists, both of them come out of nowhere, and the second one literally reveals she's a lesbian before she reveals she's a murderer. So, You know, we really love that conflation right there. I'm not going to say this book is openly homophobic. I'm just saying that there is definitely some issues in the way that the LGBT characters are portrayed. For instance, the only LGBT character that is openly LGBT is literally the main villain, and I'm not going to spoil that, but it's literally not mentioned that this woman is a lesbian until she is revealed as the villain. And the only other time they mention any LGBT characters is to essentially say that one of them was totally straight, that they have never had a gay bone in their body, and it really feels like they're overselling it. And I'm just like, I don't care if they were, and I really wonder why you care so much. Basically, it was boring, it was confusing, and there was just some subtext where you're just like, uncomfortable. But I shall move on. So I haven't read a lot of thrillers, so I was mostly trying to play with the amnesia trope, thinking what series, what books have I read that really played them really well. And so I have two for you. The first is a manga series by Clamp, which is probably my favorite mangaka, or actually I think it would be a circle, but not the point, and that is Chobits. Chobits is a story of a man who essentially gets a personal computer, but it's in the future, and the personal computer is a hot anime girl. And so while there is a bit of this sort of DDLG part of the relationship, a lot of it is about essentially growing closer to somebody and having this emotional relationship without sex. And so it is a bit more ecchi, it is a bit more like that, but it is a really interesting and philosophical piece, and I really loved it. If you're looking for sort of more, I guess, cerebral sci-fi that talks about like these emotional subjects, I definitely would recommend Chobits. It's one of Clamp's older works, but it's definitely worth looking up. Another one I would recommend is probably one of the best thrillers I watched as a movie though, and that is Long Kiss Goodnight, which came out in 1996. Long Kiss Goodnight is basically like a 90s version of Jason Bourne, but it is with a female spy who has a husband and daughter. One thing I hate to see in movies is this false dichotomy that a woman can only be either a domestic partner or this hard-ass career woman. And it's a false dichotomy because you never ask a man whether or not he can only be a family man or he can be a career person. Most men have the belief that they can both have a family and a career. But when you come to portraying women in media, it's this implication that a woman either has a family or she has a career, and that is just a false dichotomy, which is insulting. People can have multiple aspects of their life that they enjoy, but we're getting off track. So next up was a book that I picked up because I wanted to have a lovely time with the gays. And I had a boring ass time with the gays. Did not enjoy it at all. That was The Music of What Happened by Bill Konigsburg. Now, The Music of What Happens is a lovely teenage romance about two boys who somehow, against all laws and legal precautions, managed to run a food truck together in the heat of the summer. And what I hate about it is a lot of things. First of all, the meet cute. Essentially, the entire premise revolves around a mother who has severe mental health issues, not taking care of her mental health, and forcing a child to become the sole breadwinner of her family. I don't like that. I consider that child negligence, and I don't think that's a cute way to meet hot boys. Also, I really hated one of the main protagonists, and that's an issue when you're reading a romance novel. His name is Jordan. What you need to know is he's the most stereotypically campy gay I've ever met. And also he's a whiny bitch baby that doesn't address his issues in life. And I did not like that. I did not like him. I didn't think he was an interesting character. I didn't even think he was an interesting closeted gay character. And I just did not like the story. Also, I listened to this audiobook and his voice actor was really obnoxious, but I think that was just the way the dialogue was written. I don't want to have any shade towards that voice actor. You did as best as you could, honey. But it's just, I did not like it, and I hear a lot of people did like the book. I hear that, it really picks up, they deal with some, dark and heavy themes, but I was just not getting into it. And also, I really didn't like how they portrayed food trucks and the restaurant industry, because it really felt like Konigsburg has never been in a restaurant in its life, because health inspectors would have shut their ass down months ago. But that might just be a personal bias based on my professional experience. What I'm going to recommend for this is something that was a really good parallel. Essentially, Simon and Alex, they have this classic jock-nerd duo, and we've seen it before, and I've definitely seen it before in male-male romances. Obviously, any sort of situation where you have that hyper-masculine character and that sort of power imbalance, people get hot and heavy for that. But one thing I really do enjoy that does this whole jock-nerd sort of pairing well was a podcast called The Bright Sessions. The Bright Sessions is amazing. It's an amazing audio drama, it's an amazing sci-fi podcast, and it's also gay as shit and has a really healthy view of mental health because the main character is literally a therapist. And so that's everything we want to see in a modern audio drama / narrative story. So The Bright Sessions is split among each of the patrons of Dr. Bright. So one of the storylines follows Caleb, who is a stereotypical jock. He has anger management issues. Also, he's an empath, which kind of one of the reasons why he has issues controlling his anger, because all these feels he is not being able to handle it. And so what happens is he makes this unlikely friendship with this shy emo kid in his class, who's basically just so fucking depressed he cannot handle it. Like, Caleb is constantly just like, can he stop being sad? I am having my own issues, and you are just putting off way too much energy. And he's like, all he does is listen to Vampire Weekend and make me feel really bad about myself. But then they become friends, and it really helps, like, balance both of their, like, emotional energies, because they're both very strong-feeling people. And then it gets gay. And it gets gay in the gayest and best of ways. And that is just what I call a lovely time with the gays. Also, I should mention that The Bright Sessions has multiple LGBT characters and just is amazing and beautiful and everything I need in my life. It's just, if you could find, like, a podcast that's just like, hey, do you want to, like, watch, like, a superhero story? Like Alphas? But it's just so good and just so prevalent to the emotions and experiences of your life. And you're like, yes, and it's just like, watch The Bright Sessions. Well, listen to The Bright Sessions, but you know what I mean. Okay, so moving on, because I'm thinking of things that make me happy, and I'm supposed to be thinking of things that make me absolutely irrationally angry, we're moving on to a romance novel that made me want to claw my eyes out. That's Due to Your Desire by Brenda Taylor. Now, I had such high hopes about this. It was a western, there was cowboys and nannies, which, to be fair, I'm not really into nanny fiction, because I don't really find men who can take care of babies that romantic, because I think that it shouldn't be a new or novel thing for a male to be a caretaker or to have parental instincts, but, not all guys are great. If that's what gets the ladies tingling, I mean, I'm not one to judge. But I read this for the Reading Rush, which I will not be doing next year, I've mentioned that. And it's all about this woman who is overly qualified to become a nanny for a single child, essentially living with this cowboy who's a bachelor and is sad because his fiancée died 6 years ago and he's not over it. And I wish this, was just a regular pulpy novel. I like pulp. I like cheese. If a book's just I just want to write a trashy romance where they have some problems, they kind of get over it halfway through, and then they bang a bunch, I wouldn't mind that. But they don't do that. They spend the entire book talking. And I talk a lot, and I wish they would shut up, okay? They talk way too much, and they don't do anything except talk, and then describe what all this fun stuff they did off screen. And I'm thinking, you could have showed me this, but they didn't show me jack shit. They told me everything in this book. It felt like I watched a movie, and half of it was dialogue, and the other half was somebody visually describing what happened on screen. And I'm like, this isn't a visual medium. You don't need to describe to me what's happening on screen. You should be showing me through setting or location or just actually describing an object outside of dialogue. And it was like, I don't care about these people. They're one-dimensional, they have no interesting personality trait, and everything about these characters is so frickin' Hallmark that I want to gag because it's sickly sweet. Oh my goodness, he's a great father, he loves his children. Oh my goodness, she's a magic Disney princess, and all the animals that absolutely hate everyone instantly want to eat her cookies. oh my goodness, all of these random characters who I've never met before, but they have to be from some other book she read, totally think you two should bang. The whole town thinks you should bang. Why aren't you banging yet? And I'm like, why the hell is this book so damn boring? And then the sex happens, and it's not even good, because it has the exact same tell don't show as the rest of the novel. And you know what the worst thing you can write for a smutty scene like that? Is telling people it's hot. It's not hot if you're not even giving me descriptions. The descriptions is what makes something steamy, and there ain't no descriptions. And the whole book was boring, the whole book was trite, and I was never more disappointed in a romance novel. I have read the most trashiest romances ever. Like, I picked up Bodies Rippers when I was a kid, mostly for those scenes, and I'm like, okay, the dialogue is boring, and I don't care about this character's motivations, but at least they can describe what room they're in without just talking for 5 pages, and you know the stuff was steamy, but this thing was just dull AF. I'm like, I'm more disappointed than if I picked up an actual Harlequin novel. So, what am I going to recommend? Well, I've only ever read one more other book that has a nanny in it who gets some, and that was Turn the Key by Ruth Ware. This is the first book I finished this year, and what it has is a nanny who actually delves into her experience of what it means to nanny. And so I thought that was interesting. I like actually seeing how she went about her job, how she took care of children, what qualifies a nanny to be a nanny, and I thought that was really fascinating. But it also has a, romantic subplot that's interesting, that, you're kind of like, ooh, is she gonna get it? And then she gets it, and it's hot, and then she realizes that shit is whack, and she's about to, be in danger. Because the Turn of the Key is also like a gothic thriller, and I love that. So, that was a good nanny romance, and that was a subplot, Brenda Taylor. That was a subplot. You had subplots in your book that you didn't even flesh out. I'm going to get off this because I'm still angry about this. Go watch my 2 hours of footage I compiled for my reading rush if you really want to hear me get into this. Next up is the second book I hated from the reading rush, and that was Wargames by David Bischoff. I'm going to keep this short because I spent way too much time roasting the last book. Basically, it was not as good as the movie. It was a bit dry, even though it was bog standard 80s, I guess, fiction. And there were just some really weird elements of men writing women in that. There's literally a line where she's just like, oh, I don't look virginal with my sweat dripping down my titties. And I'm thinking, this girl is 16, David Bischoff. Get your damn hand out of your pants and put it back on the keyboard. It was weird. It was gross. And especially considering that this scene was between her and her love interest's father was a bit creepy. Also, it was just really boring, and I was really disappointed because Wargames was a fantastic movie from the 80s. It was a good time. It was a movie I watched as a child, and I'm just like, this is definitely going to shape me pulp culturally for the rest of my life, because I only have 2 sets of, nostalgia. Early 2000s, and some weird misplaced nostalgia for the 80s because of my parents. And Wargames was part of that, and this book sucked a dick, and not in an interesting or pleasurable way. I also want to mention that David Lightman comes off as more of just this creepy neckbeard than cool hacker boy, and that's all I'm going to say about that. Now, what am I going to recommend? First, watch the actual Wargames movie because this was a horrible adaptation of it. Second, if you want to watch something watch a reason that has sort of the 80s nostalgia and enjoyment for it, I recommend Ready Player One. Obviously, the whole thing is soaked in 80s nostalgia, but it's good, it's well written, and it has definitely those... And it's definitely an homage to the sort of 80s protagonists that we really loved. Like David Lightman from the movie, or the guy from, The Last Starfighter. Those types of teenage protagonists that we really enjoy from 80s action sci-fi movies. That's a good recommendation. Or if you want to read something that's an actual movie-to-book adaptation from the 80s, read Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. The movie is a almost perfect adaptation of the book, but you get to see it in written form, and it definitely has a lot of interesting elements. It wasn't my favorite Crichton novel, but it is a good movie-to-book adaptation from the 80s. So, last book on my list was The Last Widow by Karin Slaughter. First of all, honey, I love your last name. I don't know if that's a pen name, but apropos. Second, I didn't like this book, mostly because there was just a lot of really boring dialogue that had nothing to do with the central premise of the plot. And I don't know if this is just a thing with thrillers where they spend all this time talking about boring, domestic inner monologues without actually getting to the reason why I picked up this book. I don't know if that's a thing in the genre, but it is a thing in a lot of these thrillers that I keep putting down. And I wasn't into it. Yeah, it was interesting. You can obviously write, a good internal monologue, Slaughter, but it wasn't something that I wanted to read, because I wanted to read about people getting kidnapped and about bombs blowing up places. And really hope that phrase is not taken out of context. But mostly what I got was boring domestic dialogue. Like I said before when I reviewed this in one of my wrap-ups, 3 pages of a woman deciding whether or not she should let her daughter buy lip gloss. Not lipstick, not a full makeup palette, not a piercing or a tattoo or dyeing her hair, a tube of lip gloss. 3 pages, and they get into it. Karin Slaughter could have written an essay about this woman's decisions about whether or not her daughter should have lip gloss. And you know what? That's not that interesting for a thriller. I mean, it would have been an interesting comedy sketch, but it was not good thriller material. And for things like that, I DNF this book. Now, because, once again, boring domestic dialogue that doesn't get to the point, and the fact that I DNF this about 4 chapters in, I'm not exactly sure what happened in this book, because I was just waiting for the book to start. So I didn't have a lot to work with in terms of prompts. Now, the main character that gets kidnapped while she was thinking about whether or not her daughter should have basic lip gloss, which I should mention was a pretty common thing for middle schoolers to have, and I even owned lip balm as a child, though my dad still thought that was weird, was the fact that she worked for the CDC, or the Center for Disease Control. If you don't know what that is, it is a pathological research committee on board that investigates the spread of illnesses and disease, and is essentially one of the highest ranked, agencies that handles that. I believe it is independent from the US government, but do not quote me on that. And so I try to think more on, outbreak stories. So the 2 I would recommend is Helix. It is a dark sci-fi set. The first season is set in a Arctic research outpost, and the CDC team is trying to stop the spread of a disturbing experimental virus. That's some good shit. It's dark, it's set in Antarctica, which we love that setting, and it's just a really well-created drama/thriller. The second story I'm going to recommend is The Andromeda Strain by Crichton, which also deals with a select team of people trying to discover the origins of a virus that has infected an entire town in the middle of the American Southwest, and that also has some good shit for it. This novel I read, I wasn't into it, so if you like Karin Slaughter, roast me in the comments, or better yet, since we're trying to stay positive here, give me a good Karin Slaughter recommendation. Tell me, what's the best book you read from her, or something like that. Also, if you like these books, if you thought they were the best shit you ever read, tell me why. Get into it. Get zesty with it. I do not mind. I would love to hear your opinion. Or if you think that there's a better book by this author that really encapsulates who they are and their writing ability, I would love to hear your recommendations. Also, regular book recommendations, just talk to me in the comments. Please. Thank you. You're welcome. I just want to remind you guys to click that like button if you enjoyed this video, to subscribe if you're new here, and remember, wash your hands, tell your loved ones you love them, and live every day trying to be a better person. Let me False Bulls 1, 2, 3, and I'm, you guessed it, signing off.